I am Deidré Wallace, a relationship and corporate therapist. The clue is always in the gaze. Point 16. The shocking effects boarding school can have on some children. Here I explain why some young children find being sent to boarding school really hard. Already you may have heard me explaining the traumatic effects and the impact separation can have on a child. But being sent to boarding school at a young age and just after experiencing the Oedipal stage can have devastating effects on a child. I explained Sigmund Freud and the Oedipal stage in the previous video, point 15. But before you think Oedipal stuff is nonsense, wait, let me explain. Already we know that abandonment or separation from a parent in the early years can have vast emotional effects on children. Although some children are more resilient than others, but we know too that those who are more sensitive or more fragile can find the impact of rejection or separation very hard to bear. Remember the shocking little John video in point 3? However, it can be just as devastating if after experiencing the Oedipal stage or when a child is still working through the emotional stages with regards to developing their knowledge about their sex, boy or girl, power and control, and especially how much attention they can get from which parent and so on, that they then get separated from a parent and sent to boarding school, the messages they then receive can be very confusing. Suddenly, they may feel they have been bad for symbolically killing off a parent, meaning if a boy ignores or avoids daddy to gain mummy's attention, or a girl dismisses mummy to sit and flirt on daddy's knee to gain his attention and then being sent away, this can create massive trust and betrayal issues because now daddy or mummy are really gone, even if it's just for a school term at a time. To a child, the abandonment or separation from a parent may seem like it's their fault, and they may perceive it as a form of punishment. This too, I've explained in previous videos. But often parents are not aware of the emotional stages of development their child or children experience. Most people aren't even aware of the Oedipus complex. If they have heard of it, it often gets dismissed as one of Freud's weird little theories. This is a real pity, as its significance and impact on how a child develops is very important. But also, if a developmental stage isn't fully addressed or properly worked through, it gets carried over to the next stage and so on. As a result, each stage can get more complex and difficult for both child and parent. Anyway, at this point, you may actually have to watch or re-watch my video, point 3, to do with little John, who is sent to hospital nursery for 10 days whilst his mother gives birth to her second child. I will add the link in the comments below. You may have learned that it took only a few days before little John had lost all trust in his mother, feeling he had been abandoned by her. And from the angry look of utter dismissal he gave his mother when she returned, this after leaving him in the hospital only to have her second child, was shocking. Little John was, of course, only a toddler. However, a child at age 5 or 6 still does not have the language to describe their feelings about going away to school or whether they may feel rejected and abandoned by their mothers or fathers. Indeed, usually there is no therapy offered during the first few weeks of boarding school, and I doubt if any emotional support is really provided either. The hope is the child will just toughen up and survive. Some adults may vehemently state that they thoroughly enjoyed boarding school and sending their own children there will do them no harm. On one level, this might be true, but on another, and from what we know about the brain, as I've explained in my video in point 14, is that when we are young, the brain suppresses and hides painful experiences in order so we can go to school and learn. Indeed, even some of my clients couldn't remember a thing from their childhoods. Trying to remember just drew a blank, and you may have experienced this too. Yet, in later years, the abandoned feelings may return via depression and so on, And some adults don't always join the dots and realize the full extent that being separated from their parents may actually have had on their later life choices, their relationships, and so on. Today, most clinicians recognize the boarding school syndrome as having a traumatic emotional effect on children, which can then hover for many years to come. We have all probably witnessed and heard how some children scream and even hang on to a parent's clothing in fear that they will be left forever as they contemplate the first day at nursery or at school. Those, especially with separation anxiety, would find the severing of the parental tie extremely painful. Feeling wrenched from their mothers can be frightening. Imagine how children must feel when dumped at boarding school for days and weeks on end as they wait and wait for parents to either visit or to collect them during holidays. Some are not so lucky. Often children lie crying in bed for hours longing for their mummy. Slowly, however, they learn to cope by suppressing the longing, their sadness, and most of all, their anger. For a 5 or 6 year old, this must seem like emotional torture. These children then sadly learn to hide their sadness, and some learn to act out their fear and anger by asserting dominance over anyone weaker, becoming bullies devoted to winning above all costs. This as a defense mechanism, or one can even suggest it's a survival mechanism used to suppress the pain. Sadly, bullying is endemic in many boarding schools. Older boys then use younger boys as servants, demanding they obey. If not, various punishment gets meted out. This as they also act out their inner understanding that bad, disobedient, and abandoned boys get punished, leading directly into a child's psyche that it was their fault. They are bad, which is why their parents abandoned them. And by the way, the older boys will have received the same behavior from the boys they once served. Boarding school can therefore be extremely distressing for a child, and those who are more sensitive or more fragile don't always toughen up. What they do is they withdraw into themselves, even if they may do well academically or in sport. What I have seen is that in later years, the sensitive ones turn to drugs and alcohol. They may self-sabotage or self-harm and so on. Some commit suicide. Sure, others who are stronger may be able to build an emotional defense mechanism around themselves that will endure, but heaven help anyone who tries to come close. They will only allow a few in, the few that experience the same thing and those they can relate to, and those in the boys' club. But also the psychological impact of those formal separation experiences can leave a child emotionally ill-prepared for relationships in the adult world. The shocking memory of being left, losing a parent's gaze, presence, and attention can also damage a child's trust, resulting in a fear of intimacy, lest that trust be broken again. Also, our parents' relationship is our relationship blueprint. It is therefore crucial for a child to watch parents manage their relationship. This prepares a child for adult relationships as they watch and learn. Years spent at boarding school negates this too. As a result, as adults, they may have insecurities about relationships, how to flirt, how to date, or how to sustain a relationship. Yet and again, for those who insist their childhood in boarding school was extremely happy, it may not always be reflected in their personal or business relationships. Sadly, too, sexual abuse has also been known to be rampant. And sadly, even if it gets reported to the press and the investigation undertaken, the abuser just gets moved on. However, if as a parent you still insist on sending your child to boarding school, or indeed having to send a child to boarding school because there are no good schools in the area where you live and so on, then I suggest you speak to the headmaster and teachers to ensure any bullying is stamped out and that a child psychologist is available if your child ever withdraws emotionally, like in the case of little John. You may also want to start a conversation with your child about going to school, what it could mean for them, and if any bullying occurs, what they could do about it. In so doing, you allow your child to feel it hasn't failed you if it struggles to cope. For further reading on this topic, I can recommend Sad Little Men by Richard Beard, Stiff Upper Lip by Alex Renton, who was abused at prep school, and his excellent book is about boarding school, its cruelty and misery. And now back to you. Have or did you go to boarding school? What was your experience? Can you remember what it was like when you first arrived, what you felt, and how you learned to cope? How have you managed in adulthood, and would you send your child to boarding school? Once again, I would also encourage you to start a journal if you haven't already. So as I go through the various points, you can jot down how you think or feel my knowledge is helping you understand yourself better. And do comment or subscribe if you wish to learn more. Thank you.